Not a lot of people know that before Toad was a ruthless kart driver on the sands of a dry desert, he was earning his salt as a Podracer pilot at the Boonta Eve Classic.
You're a pilot?
All my life!
So here's my attempt at recreating Toad's official Podracer out of garbage and spare junk.
Welcome to Mario Kart!
Achuta studs the wajoboda studs in bunky dunkle. This video is part of a collab with several other pod racers, so make sure you get your fill after this one or I'll feed you to the Sarlacc. See ya!
For my Podracer engines, I'm starting with a jar and a jar because they're the right kind of cylindrical shape I'm after. I don't need the threaded part of the jar, so I'll just go ahead and cut the entire head off. Even if you hate sand, it's very important to sand down all of the shiny junk plastic we'll be using.
I'll try spinning, that's a good trick!
This will give it some texture to help the super glue bind all the garbage. I really didn't have a plan for this build, I just sort of jumped into it and started cutting it apart and adding things as I went along. I'm going for an asymmetrical engine layout where one of the engines has its guts exposed to help distract the eye from my lack of design by adding more details to look at. Like these chunks of hair rollers that I'm adding as grates to help fill in the empty windows I cut out. And then to fill out this grate space, I'm using a couple pieces from this dollar store droid. These are the Robo Toes. Then to help the super glue bond a little quicker, I'm spraying some CA glue accelerant directly onto my skin. Here's a water filter. Oh, this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them. I'm using these in possibly the most obvious way as the propulsion part of each of my engines. Here's a piece from a jumbo shampoo pump to add a little rocket hole to the tip. And then here's a little tubular piece from that same pump, which I'm dividing into two and then gluing a little gear charm on the end. It is a complete coincidence that it kind of fits into this space I cut out on the side of each engine because I definitely didn't plan for it. Much like how I didn't plan on fishing these plastic jar pieces out of the trash and then gluing them back onto the jars as extra panel detail. Whoa, did you see how bad this seam line looks? Let's hide it with a strip of plastic sheet that I'm adding rivets to with a push pin. I picked up this technique from Bill Making Stuff, and he picked up this technique from a channel called Studson Studio. Hey, do you hear that? I'm using the cord from a broken pair of headphones to not only add in some wire details, but as a way to cover up several areas of gaps between panels. Panel gaps are unsightly, I'm not afraid to deal in absolutes. Here's a little Gundam bit I'm placing over the wire as a power converter, and then speaking of Gundam bits, I'm using a few of them to create a big mess of an engine block that'll be exposed on one of the engines. It's also made of more shampoo pump bottle, and of course you gotta have a metal coil in there somewhere. That's enough details on this little mess, time to glue it into the rest of the engine tube. For the energy binder, I'm stealing this Christmas ornament plug, and then gluing it into the area where the energy binder goes. For those not versed in pod racing, the energy binder is the part that does this. To help sell the idea that the engine wires are being held on by something, I'm gluing on a few sporadic pieces of plastic tubing as cable mounts here and there. Then I'm using these beautiful nail rhinestones as rivets. I won't torture you with all the rivets, just these 200,000 rivets ready with a million more on the way. Christmas is back again, but it's time to cut it short, because we need those good mushroom boosts to send Toad on a fast shroom trip. I sealed up each mushroom tip on some plasticard using super glue and got rid of the extra plastic. To spice up these domes, I'm using a ping pong ball to make the spots for each of the toadstools. Alright, this is where the fun begins. The engines are finally starting to look like toadstools and not a couple of spice jars. No rivets? Rivets. To finish the engines, I'm adding a couple beads to serve as the cable connectors, and that's looking pretty good. Let's check in with Toad. I recently dismantled a few spray bottles which are filled with some excellent junk to become the Podracer cockpit. This piece from a dollar store tank goes right here because that's just where it fits. Then a nice ergonomic spray bottle trigger to become the ergonomic bucket seat. I also had this dollar store quad racer which has some choice bits for a pod racer, such as these handlebars and this seat, but I already have a seat.
Take a seat.
Okay, alright, maybe I can stick it on the bottom here, but I need to sand it against something round until it's attained to that perfect pod curvature. That's looking nice and flush. In a previous video, this robo-dog was ripped apart, and now we finally get to harvest some of its face parts, such as the nose and ear, for a few pod details on the back. This is a machine gun barrel for the cable holder, and then the front of the Quadracer for the front of the Podracer, and then, oh, what's this part from? It's a shiny chest from a Vader toy I had to rip apart to make the dashboard. Don't cry, Anakin. This little bit looked kind of like a mushroom antenna, then I'm adding a couple bedazzled mushroom spots, and episode 1 is complete. Time for a sequel. First I primed the pod white, then I figured brown would be a better bet because I want it to be a bit of a rust bucket. But why stop at brown when you can make it more brown? I'm mixing up a goop of brown paint and baking soda to create a crusty, rusty paste that I'm stippling over all the areas that I want to have some rust texture. This sludge also works as a pretty decent gap filler for the areas where I was not very thorough about gluing and sanding edges. After a good slop, we're left with this lump lord, which we will now enhance with a rusty family of oranges and browns to bring out a nice rusty appearance. Occasionally I'd switch to a tattered chunk of sponge just to get a more random smattering of paint. I was actually really digging how the rust was turning out, but it's really just practice because it's all going to be hidden in a layer of paint. That's right, I've made a fine addition to my collection of goops with some acrylic masking fluid. This is used to mask out areas you want to keep free of paint. I'll go more into this invisible juice later, but for now we're moving on to making the pod blue. The name of the painting game is a whole lot of stippling and attempting some very quick and dirty color blends, so forgive me if I power slide a little quick through a lot of these paints on this rainbow road. I'm trying to avoid painting over the rusty edges because I want to keep some of that delicious crust in the final product. I started with darker paints, then worked my way up using lighter and lighter shades while the paint was still wet to attempt to blend it into a gradient. The general scheme here was to mimic the classic blue, white, yellow of Toad's Cart. Time to hit the paint blends once more for the mushroom engines, which will be somewhat inspired by the color scheme of the Star Shroom in Mario Galaxy. For these color gradients, I'm using a light pink near the top of the mushrooms where they get deliciously oven roasted by the Tatooine suns. Then I did one more gradient on the toadstool spots, but this one's a little more subtle. I tried to make them kind of toffee brown near the bottom of each one. I didn't want to lose too much of the tasty rust that I built up, so for the base of the mushrooms I sponged on some silver to try to make it look really worn around the engine area. But for the body of the engine, might I suggest another resident of Browntown? Toffee is here and ready to cover up all the rust in a way that I might kind of regret later. I think I have a somewhat high threshold for acceptance of mediocrity, so even though I'm not a super huge fan of the current state of the brown color scheme, I'm kind of thinking, good enough, we'll fix it in the weathering stage. And for the business end of the engine, I wanted to keep it as sort of a tarnished rusty funnel, so I stippled on just a little bit of bronze in a few choice spots. And now, the exciting conclusion of how we're going to remove this masking fluid. Using an old toothbrush or a current toothbrush, I am vigorously rubbing away all the areas where I think there was masking fluid, but I honestly don't remember, and that was a mistake. But it gives a nice paint chipping effect, and now it's time for a wash. I'm trying my hand at an oil paint wash using mineral spirits. Just pour a little bit into a cup, then squeeze out just a little bit of oil paint into the mineral spirits until you get a consistency that is good. I don't really know what good is. I think this is kinda good. I didn't want to go so dark that I would regret it, so I opted for a less is more approach. Don't be afraid to go a little bit extra juicy with the wash. It takes a bit of time to dry anyway, so there was plenty of time to dab off the excess using a paper towel, which has the added benefit of making it look more rando Calrissian. I also added a few streaky zoomy lines. To energy bind the engines together, it was a combo of a straightened out paperclip with the powerful union of superglue and accelerant to lock in the bond real quick. Then I had this little lightning effect from a toy to give the Podracer unlimited power. I'm gluing a few bits around the wire to try to hide it the best I can. And then to connect the engines to the pod, I'm using a clothes hanger, and this is what it looks like on the back. To make the wires, just spend about an hour frustratingly bending them into the perfect shape, making sure to cut new ones every time the wires accidentally snap from overbending. I considered trying to get a thinner gauge wire, but the benefits of a clothes hanger are that it was free and it's extra sturdy for intense playtime. This thing's definitely going to return to the closet later and hold at least a couple pairs of pants. The wire was looking a little too nude, so I'm adding a length of red wire, which is how I imagine Toad is controlling his engines and diverting item block power-ups to his Podracer. Then I'm tying the bright red together with a little bit of a black wash. Then just a tiny lamb's giggles worth of a silver dry brushing to bring out a few raised details. And lastly, weathering powders. This is another weathering technique that I've recently absorbed from Bill Making Stuff. These are homemade weathering powders made from crushing up chalk pastels to make convincing dirt, rust, angel dust, or whatever other kind of effect you want to smother on something. Alright, all done. Let's get a load of Toad's Podracer.
Yippee!
Don't forget to do yourself a favor and check out the Podracer builds in the description from Scratch Bashing, Boylai Hobby Time, Eric's Hobby Workshop, and Bill Making Stuff. Each of their designs are so inspired and their videos constantly inspire me. I don't think I could have made this Podracer build without all of their techniques that I have surreptitiously lifted from their crafting arsenals. They're all super talented crafters and model makers. As always, thank you to all of my patrons for helping support me in making these videos. May the 4th be with you, and I'll see you next time.